Okay, this video is going to be a really quick video to introduce you to IDLE, which is Python's Integrated Development and Learning Environment. That's what IDLE stands for. You have a homework coming up to make sure that you have IDLE installed and that you at least know how to start using it. IDLE will probably not be the way that we ultimately run and turn in our programming assignments. We'll probably be doing that from the Unix command line, which one of the next videos coming up will talk about using that. But IDLE is really good for kind of experimenting, playing around, making sure you understand how something works. So one of the first things we need to do is to make sure that we have Python installed on the machine. So what I have here in my window right now is a terminal running on my Mac OS machine. So you know, the first thing you might do is you might type Python -V. That will find the Python program if it exists on the machine, run it, and tell you what version we're running. So when I do that, I get Python not found. There are different names. A lot of times the Python name is linked to the version of Python you want to use on the machine. In this class we're going to be using Python 3, so I'm going to type Python 3 -V, and lo and behold, it finds a program named Python 3. It runs it, it acknowledges the -V command and says this is Python 3.11.3. So I have a new version or an up-to-date version of Python on this machine. Now, the easiest way to run IDLE is to run whatever your Python command is, and then use the -M option, which says I want you to find a module and run it. And there is a module called idle-lib, which invokes and runs the IDLE command. So if I hit return here to issue this command, lo and behold, an IDLE shell appears. It identifies some information about Python on the machine, and then it gives me 3 greater than signs, which is IDLE's prompt that basically says, hey, what would you like to do next? So I can just start entering Python commands. For example, I will print hello world. So there's the command I want to issue. Notice that keywords are highlighted, strings are highlighted, so it uses some color to help you read and identify things within your program. So if I hit return, it interprets and executes that line, and as you would probably expect, prints hello world to the screen. Now I can set some variables, like I can say x equals 10, y equals 20, and it's actually executing those. These are assignment statements, so it's creating the variables and assigning values to them, but there is no output. So what I can do is I can use, for example, an F string, which hopefully you've read about and or seen in my video lecture. So with an F string, the nice thing is you can have it look up values of variables and replace these variable names in the curly brackets with either, in those two cases, x and y, the value of the variable, or as I'm going to do here, I can actually put a math statement and it will perform that calculation. So hopefully this is going to print out 10 plus 20 equals 30. So that should be a syntactically correct print statement with a properly formatted F string. So if I hit return, as I said, I get 10 plus 20 equals 30. Now, you can go back and re-edit things. So if I move back to this print statement, I can't edit it right there, but if I move up to that line and hit return, it's going to bring this line down to become the current line within my shell. And then what I'm going to do is maybe I'm going to say, well, instead of doing addition, I really wanted to do multiplication. So as you see, I just used my arrow keys to move back and replace those plus signs with asterisks, which in a lot of programming languages, including Python, is the symbol for multiplication. Now that I've made the changes, I can simply hit return. And now it's going to say 10 times 20 equals 200. So it's a nice interactive way to go through and kind of experiment and make sure you have your code correct. Now, one thing that may or may not be handy is there is a globals command that will list all of the global variables that your current program you're working on in IDLE sees. So if we issue globals, we get a bunch of built-in stuff, these things, most of which have underscores in them. But notice towards the end of that output, it says there's a variable x, and it shows its current value is 10, and there is a variable y, and its current value is 20. So the nice thing about the globals function is you can find out what variables are defined and also find out their current value. Now, another way to do this would have been to simply say, hey, I would like to print out the current value of y, and it's going to say it's 20. Now let's say I said I want to see what the current value of z is. Well, as we can see, or we know from doing this, there is no variable z. So if I try to print out z, I'm going to get an error message that ultimately down at the bottom says z is not defined. So I have not yet given z a value. Now, one thing that can be handy is if I wanted to kind of clear all this out, I could obviously quit idle and then reissue the command to start idle back up. But up here under the shell menu, there is a restart shell, and if I say restart shell, it's going to put this little divider line there and say, hey, you restarted the shell. And now if I look, like let's say I want to print x now, well, there is no x because resetting the shell clears everything I've done out and is basically equivalent to exiting idle and going back into idle. Want to show you a few more features of idle and talk about a couple of new topics. We may not have covered it yet in lecture, but there is a while statement in Python, and basically while a condition is true, do something. So there's the syntax, there's the while, and the condition is true, always true. And then the colon basically says I'm starting my while loop. And when I hit return, notice it performs an indentation for me. Because in Python, when you nest things or put things within loops, they have to have consistent indentation. Also notice that the prompt changed from 3 greater thans to 3 dots. So the ... basically means you're inside some type of construct. In this case, I'm within a while loop. So within this while loop, the first thing I want to do is print the string running ... And when I hit return, I'm still in the while loop. And then let's say I wanted to sleep 3 seconds in between this. So most programming languages have a sleep command. Sometimes it's in milliseconds, sometimes it's in seconds. Python is in seconds. So I'm just going to type sleep 3 and see if it happens immediately, which is 3 milliseconds probably, or if it actually waits 3 seconds. So I'm kind of taking a guess if I was new to Python. So I want to sleep 3 seconds, then go back and execute the loop again. So when I hit return, it's going to allow me to enter another line in the while loop, but I am actually done. So I'll hit return one more time, and notice that I get an error message that sleep is not defined. So I can either go do a web search if I was new to Python, or since I do know Python, I'll say, oh gee, there is a time library that I need to use. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to arrow back up to the sleep line, hit return, and notice it brings the whole while loop down and repeats the code for me. I'll move over to the beginning and say, oh, I made a mistake. I'm supposed to say time.sleep. So I'll correct that and hit return. And it's still telling me, instead of sleep being not defined, it's telling me time's not defined. And then I can say, oh, time is a module that I need to import. So I do that with the import. So if you have modules that have functions in them, you can use the import command. Now that I've imported the time module, hopefully I can go back and issue this while command again, and notice that now it is going to run correctly. And yes, it looks like there's about 3 seconds in between each output of the string running. But the problem is I've created an infinite loop. I've said while true. Well, that's always true, and my loop's never going to finish. So there are a couple of ways to break out of this loop. If you're in idle, you can go up to the shell, and there's an interrupt execution that you can choose. But notice that here for the hotkey it says Control C, and that's the Unix break command. So I could either do shell restart execution, or more, because I'm a Unix person, I'm going to go down here into the idle shell, hold the Control key down, and hit C. And then when it finishes up the current sleep, notice that it says keyboard interrupt and gives me the prompt back. Now then, when I'm done with idle, there is a quit function, which is quit, open bracket, close bracket. And if I do that, that's going to terminate my idle shell. So notice it's going to ask me if I want to kill the program that's in there, and I can say okay. The window went away, and then look back over here in my Unix shell, my Python 3 command that I was running terminated and took me back to the Unix command prompt. So that was just a really quick intro to idle, what it's good for, and some example uses of idle.